In the far edge of the Orion Arm, beyond the trade routes and quiet stars, there was a planet called Varkoth. It was a world of stone, heat, and warriors. Every mountain carried old blood in its cracks, and every city echoed with the sound of battle songs. On Varkoth, the people were not born equal, they were forged. The natives, called the Draxan, were giant reptilian beings, covered in thick scales the color of molten rock. Their claws were long, their teeth sharp, and their eyes burned like tiny suns. But what mattered most to them were their scars. To a Draxan, every scar told a story. A cut across the chest meant courage. A burn on the arm meant endurance. A missing claw meant glory. Their culture was built on the idea that pain was proof of power. A warrior without scars was no warrior at all, just an untested creature unworthy of respect. They held tournaments every moon cycle, where fighters battled until one fell or bled. The winner stood tall, blood dripping, chest open to the crowd, proud of the wounds that would soon become marks of honor. The Draxan chanted, "Scars show strength. Flesh remembers victory." In this world, a soft, perfect skin was a symbol of weakness. A Draxan with no scars was laughed at, ignored, or even exiled. Scars were everything, and then one day something arrived from the sky that had no scars at all. A small human ship broke through the clouds and landed near the Draxan stronghold. The ground shook as the ship's landing gear settled into the red dust. Warriors surrounded it immediately, weapons ready, expecting an enemy or prey. But when the doors opened, what stepped out was something strange. A human. He was tall for his kind, but compared to a Draxan, he looked fragile. Soft skin, thin frame, no scales, no armor, no claws. His clothes were clean, his face calm, and most shocking of all, not a single scar marked his body. The Draxan warriors burst into laughter. Their voices thundered across the field. Some pointed, others hissed insults. One of them, a scarred brute with a broken tusk, shouted, "Look, the stars have sent us a baby. No scars, no story." The human didn't flinch. He only adjusted the strap of his small metal case and spoke, his voice steady and clear. "My name is Dr. Elias Grant," he said. "I'm a surgeon. I heard your people were injured. I came to help." The laughter stopped. The Draxan stared at him as if he had spoken nonsense. Help? What kind of warrior needed help? On Varkoth, wounds were sacred. Only the weak begged for healing. Pain was their teacher, blood their proof of life. A young Draxan stepped forward, his eyes narrow. "You call yourself a surgeon? Is that a kind of fighter?" Elias smiled slightly. "No, I don't make wounds. I close them." This answer only made the warriors angrier. Closing wounds? Removing scars? That was an insult to their way of life. The crowd parted as a figure emerged from the fortress gates, the warlord Korath, leader of the Draxan clans. He was enormous, even for his kind. His scales were blackened from flame, his face split by 3 deep scars that crossed his eyes like lightning bolts. He had earned every mark through decades of battle. The air grew tense as he approached. "Human," Korath growled, his voice rumbling like thunder. "Why have you come to my world?" Elias met his gaze without fear. "Because your soldiers are dying. Infection, blood loss, sickness. I can stop it." The warlord tilted his head. "Stop death?" "Yes," Elias said simply. "If you let me work." The Draxan roared with laughter again. The idea that this smooth-skinned creature could stop death itself was absurd. But Korath was curious. He was old enough to know that sometimes strength came in strange forms. "Very well," the warlord said. "You wish to prove your strength? Then heal one of mine." 2 warriors dragged a body forward. The soldier was barely breathing, his chest torn open from a plasma blade. Blood seeped through the sand. The Draxan stood back, expecting the human to panic. Instead, Elias dropped to his knees beside the dying warrior. He opened his case and pulled out his tools, silver instruments that gleamed in the red sunlight. His hands moved fast, steady, precise. No hesitation. No fear. The Draxan watched in silence as he worked. They had never seen such calm in the face of death. Elias's voice was low, whispering words they didn't understand, guiding his own rhythm as he stitched, cleaned, and sealed the wound. Minutes passed. The warrior's breathing slowed, then steadied. The blood stopped flowing. Elias wiped his hands, looked up, and said quietly, "He will live." The Draxan blinked. Their disbelief turned to murmurs. The wounded soldier stirred, opening his eyes. The wound, once gaping, was closed, smooth, without a scar. "Where is the mark?" a warrior shouted. Where is the proof? There is none, Elias said. He doesn't need proof. He needs life. The crowd fell silent again. In that moment, the Draxen didn't know what to think. They had seen strength in blood and scars. But this quiet, clean act felt like a different kind of power. A power they didn't understand. Korath stared at the human, his claws flexing. Strange creature, he muttered. You fight death without weapons, and you win. Elias only nodded. That's what I do. The wind howled across the field, carrying dust and silence. And somewhere deep in their hearts, the Draxen felt something new. A small crack in the old belief that scars were the only sign of strength. The Draxen fortress stood like a black mountain against the red horizon. Its walls were built from the bones of fallen beasts, and fires burned in great pits that never went out. Inside, warriors trained, shouted, and drank until the air was thick with heat and the smell of iron. But that day, the fortress was silent. Every Draxen eye followed the small human as he walked through their gates. Dr. Elias Grant, the strange scarless creature who had saved one of their own. Elias moved with quiet confidence. He carried only his silver medical kit, yet the guards stepped back as he passed. His calm made them uneasy. They had seen fearless warriors before, but this man's stillness was something else, like a weapon they didn't understand. At the far end of the great hall, Warlord Korath waited. The massive Draxen sat on a throne carved from dark stone, his battle scars glistening under the firelight. His eyes were sharp, his breath heavy, his claws resting on a blade older than the fortress itself. When Elias entered, Korath's tail flicked once, a sign of curiosity. Human, the warlord rumbled. You heal my warriors, yes. But you also take their scars. Tell me why. Elias bowed slightly. Because scars don't make you strong. They only remind you of pain. I remove what holds you back. A low growl spread through the hall. Several warriors hissed in anger. To them, those words were blasphemy. But Korath raised a claw and silenced them. His eyes narrowed. You speak of strength, he said. You who have none. Elias smiled faintly. I've seen more blood than any soldier in this room. I just don't wear it. The warlord studied him for a long time. Then he pointed toward the far doors. 2 guards dragged in another Draxen warrior. The soldier's armor was shattered, his scales torn open by plasma burns. His breathing was ragged, the smell of death thick around him. Prove your words, Korath said. Save him. Elias dropped to one knee without hesitation. He opened his kit. Scalpels, forceps, tubes, stitching tools. Strange devices the Draxen had never seen. He pulled on his gloves, his motions smooth and practiced, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. The wounded Draxen groaned. His chest rose and fell weakly. Elias looked up at Korath. I'll need clean water, heat, and silence, we said. The room erupted with laughter. You dare give orders to a warlord? One soldier shouted. But Korath's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Do as he says. Reluctantly, the warriors obeyed. They brought what he asked. Elias began to work. He cleaned the wound carefully, cutting away burnt flesh. The Draxen watching flinched. They weren't used to seeing wounds treated with such precision. Elias's hands moved quickly, every motion filled with focus and control. He whispered softly to himself as he worked. The words were human, but the tone was steady, rhythmic, almost like a prayer. The hall grew quiet. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to fade. Minutes passed. Then an hour. When Elias finally leaned back, sweat covered his brow. The wound was closed, stitched neatly, the bleeding stopped. The warrior's breathing deepened. Strong. Steady. Elias stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. He'll live, he said simply. The Draxen stared in disbelief. The wound was gone. There was no blood, no scar. Just clean, unbroken skin. The warlord rose slowly from his throne. His voice was low, dangerous. You took his mark. His proof of survival. What is he now? Elias looked him in the eye. Alive, isn't that enough? A silence filled the hall, heavy and cold. Then one of the younger warriors shouted, Scars are our pride. You dishonor us. Elias didn't answer. He packed his tools and looked around the room. Pride doesn't keep you alive, he said quietly. Pain doesn't make you stronger. It just stays with you until it kills you. The Draxen growled, fists tightening around their weapons. But Korath raised his hand again. He was thinking. For all his years of battle, he had never seen anyone face death with such calm, or defeat it so cleanly. Finally, he spoke. You heal with no blade, no power, no rage. How? Elias met his gaze. With knowledge, and hands that don't fear blood. That night, Korath ordered Elias to stay in the fortress. He would test this scarless healer further. A human who could defeat death might be dangerous or useful. Elias was given a small tent near the training grounds. Warriors came to stare at him like some strange animal from a story. Some spat when they passed. Others whispered that he was cursed, a demon who stole strength from wounds. But when the next battle ended, and wounded soldiers began to die faster than the healers could chant, Korath sent for Elias again. The human worked through the night. He didn't rest, didn't complain. One after another, Draxan warriors survived under his care. Every time he finished, their bodies bore no marks, no scars. Only smooth skin where death had once waited. Whispers began to spread through the fortress. Some called him the Scar Eater. Others began to wonder if scars really meant strength, or just old pain pretending to be honor. Korath watched from his throne, his mind turning. This human, this quiet, fragile creature was breaking the foundation of Draxan pride, and yet, he could not deny the truth in what he saw. As dawn rose over the fortress, Elias stepped outside his tent, his face lit by the first light. Around him, warriors who had once mocked him were now alive, healed by his hands. And somewhere deep inside the warlord's chest, a question began to grow. If scars showed strength, then what did it mean when the Scarless Man was stronger than them all? The fortress of Varkoth never slept. Night was filled with the sounds of growls, training, and the hiss of torches burning. But ever since the human arrived, the fortress had grown quieter at night. The Draxan no longer sang their victory chants. They whispered instead about the man who could erase scars. They called him the Scar Eater, the Flesh Weaver, or the Silent Healer. But the human had a simpler name, Dr. Elias Grant. He worked alone, deep inside a large stone tent that smelled of heat and metal. His table was made of iron, his light was the orange glow of a torch, and his hands never stopped moving. Draxan warriors came in limping, coughing, bleeding, and left alive, confused, and scarless. Each night more came. Each night the whispers grew louder. At first, most Draxan hated him. They believed his healing was witchcraft. The shamans muttered dark words, saying the human had stolen the spirits of their scars. The old healers spat on the ground when he passed, but none of them could do what he did. And that truth burned in their pride. One evening, when the twin moons hung low in the smoky sky, Elias was summoned again. A battle had broken out between rival clans, and dozens of warriors had been brought back to the fortress, their bodies torn and broken. The great hall smelled of blood and smoke. Warriors lay on the floor, groaning. The Draxan healers tried their chants, but their patients were dying. Elias stepped through the crowd, calm and focused. His blue eyes scanned the room. "I need space," he said. The Draxan moved aside, muttering. Korath, the warlord, stood nearby, watching closely. Elias set down his metal case and opened it. Inside, his instruments gleamed like silver stars, small, precise, terrifying in their beauty. He chose one. The blade was thin as light. A scalpel. The Draxan had seen many weapons. Swords, axes, plasma blades. But never something so small, so delicate, and yet so dangerous. Korath frowned. That tiny thing will save them? Elias didn't answer. He had already begun. The first warrior's wound was deep. A plasma cut across the abdomen. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Elias cleaned it carefully, his hands moving like a craftsman's, not a fighter's. Every motion was sharp, deliberate, and silent. The Draxan watched, holding their breath. They had seen many deaths, but never a battle like this one. A battle fought not with violence, but with control. He stitched the wound closed with fine thread, his movements smooth as water. Then he pressed a small device against the skin, a thin rod that hummed with gentle light. The light pulsed. The wound sealed. The bleeding stopped. The warrior breathed again, and when he lifted his head to look, there was no scar. The room fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then a voice from the back shouted, "He hides the scars. He traps them inside." The Draxan stepped back in fear. Elias straightened slowly, his face calm but tired. "I hide nothing," he said. "Your warrior lives. That's what matters." But they didn't know how to believe him. Their world had never seen healing without scars. To them, the mark of pain was sacred. It proved survival. And yet here was a man who made survival look easy. Korath's second in command, a massive Draxan named Vorik, stepped forward. His body was a map of wounds and burns. If you erase pain, he growled, then you erase who we are. Elias met his gaze. Pain doesn't make you who you are. What you do after pain does. Vorik bared his teeth. You speak like a philosopher. But here words don't matter. Scars do. He drew a blade and sliced his own arm open. The blood hissed against the stone floor. Fix that, human, he snarled. Elias said nothing. He stepped forward, cleaned the wound, stitched it shut, and sealed it with light. The blood stopped. The pain faded. And again. No scar. The crowd gasped. Vorik stared at his arm, then at Elias. His eyes burned with fury, and something else. Confusion. It doesn't even hurt, he muttered. Elias nodded. That's the point. Korath rose from his seat. His voice rumbled like thunder. Enough. Human, you will heal who I tell you. You will not touch others without my command. Elias bowed slightly. Then tell me who needs me most. The warlord's eyes glowed. Myself, the crowd froze. Korath had never asked for help from anyone. His chest bore an old wound, a jagged scar from shoulder to heart. It had been earned in his youth when he killed his rival with his bare claws. It was his most prized mark, his story, his proof of victory. Elias stepped forward, sensing the weight of the moment. If I heal it, he said softly, the scar will be gone. I know, Korath said. Do it. The human cleaned the scar, ran his device across it, and watched as the line of torn scales faded piece by piece until it vanished completely. Gasps filled the hall. The warlord's skin was smooth, unbroken. He looked down, touching the place where the mark had once been. For the first time in his life, he felt. Slightly, he turned to Elias, his voice low. You took my pain. Yet I feel stronger. Elias smiled faintly. Because you finally let it go. The Draxan whispered to each other in awe. Some bowed, others feared him more than ever. But one truth settled deep in their hearts. The human's weapon was not a blade of war. It was a scalpel, and it had changed everything. For the first time in centuries, the fortress of Varkoth was quiet. No victory chants, no roars of celebration, only whispers. The Draxan, proud children of battle, found themselves afraid, not of war, but of a single human with gentle hands. Dr. Elias Grant had done the impossible. He had healed the warlord's ancient wound, the mark that symbolized a lifetime of glory. The scar that told every Draxan who looked at it, this is Korath, the undefeated. Now, it was gone. And with it, something deep inside their hearts began to tremble. The Draxan were raised to believe that strength lived in scars. That pain was the price of power, but Elias's work had undone that belief with every clean patch of skin he left behind. Every warrior he saved became a question, a crack in the old ways. The fortress halls buzzed with confusion. Without scars, who are we? One soldier asked. Are we still warriors? Another growled. The shamans gathered in their chambers, furious and fearful. He defies the gods, one hissed. He steals the stories written on our flesh, another shouted. But even as they cursed him, they sent their injured to his tent when night came. Quietly, secretly. They feared him. Yet they needed him, and that was what frightened them most. Elias didn't seek power. He didn't argue or boast. He simply worked. Each morning, the rising sun found him already at his table, cleaning his instruments, preparing for the next wounded soldier. His hands were steady, his eyes calm. Around him, Draxan warriors watched in silence, their pride clashing with gratitude. One day, as Elias was stitching a torn wing membrane, a young Draxan named Theric asked him, Why do you help us? We mocked you. We threatened you. You owe us nothing. Elias didn't look up. His needle moved, the thread glinting in the light. Because pain doesn't deserve loyalty, he said. And because I've seen too many die for pride. Theric tilted his head. You sound like a philosopher, not a healer. Elias gave a faint smile. A good surgeon needs both. Theric said nothing more. But he didn't forget those words. As days passed, more warriors sought Elias out, sometimes with wounds, sometimes just to see. They came curious, suspicious, but always left changed. They watched him cut, sew, clean, and save without hesitation, He worked with the same care for the weakest soldier as for the mighty warlord himself. They began to see that his strength wasn't in his muscles or his scars. It was in his control, in his patience, in the way he could face death and calmly turn it away, but not everyone was ready to accept it. The shamans decided to test him. One night they sent Elias a warrior who was already dead. No pulse, no breath, just a cold, broken body. They wanted to prove he was no miracle worker, that his tools were lies, that his magic had limits. Elias knew immediately. He placed a hand over the warrior's chest and sighed. "You brought him too late." He closed the body's eyes, covered it gently with a cloth, and whispered, "No healer wins every battle." The shamans laughed cruelly. "So the great Scar-Eater fails." But the next morning the family of the dead warrior found their kin carefully wrapped, his body clean, peaceful, honored. Not like a discarded corpse, but like someone who mattered. That act, small and quiet, spread through the fortress faster than any chant. Even in death the human had shown respect. The Draxen began to question again. Was the surgeon weak? Or was his strength something they had never understood? Korath, the warlord, watched all of this in silence. He saw how fear turned to fascination, how hatred turned to curiosity. He summoned Elias to his chamber one night. The warlord sat by a massive fire, his shadow stretching across the floor like a dark mountain. His voice rumbled softly. "You're changing my people, human. They do not know whether to fear you or follow you." Elias bowed his head slightly. "Change always begins with fear." Korath's eyes glowed. "You speak as if you know this well." "I've seen it," Elias replied. "On my world, we also used to worship scars. We thought pain made us heroes, but it only made us stubborn. When we learned to heal, we learned to grow." Korath leaned forward, his claws scraping the stone. "And what did it cost you?" Elias paused. "Everything. But it was worth it." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Then Korath nodded once, a slow, heavy movement. "You are strange, human," he said. "You fight without hate. You win without blood, and yet you frighten even me?" Elias gave a tired smile. "Then we understand each other." That night, as Elias stepped outside, the Draxen moons cast long shadows across the ground. From the ramparts he could hear the warriors whispering his name, not with mockery this time, but with something else. Wonder. But in the distance, he also saw something darker. The shamans gathering near the sacred pit, chanting under their breath, eyes burning with hatred. They would not let their gods fall without a fight. Elias looked up at the stars, silent and thoughtful. He had not come to change a world, only to save lives. But now he understood. On Varkoth, saving lives could start a revolution. And somewhere, deep within the fortress, Warlord Korath stared at his healed chest in the firelight, his skin smooth, his heart heavy. He touched the place where his scar once lived and whispered to himself, "Strength without pain. What does that even mean?" The question echoed through Varkoth long after the fire died. And the human surgeon, scarless and small, had become the greatest challenge the Draxen had ever faced. The morning sky over Varkoth burned red as if the planet itself sensed a coming storm. The fortress courtyard filled with warriors, shamans, and onlookers. The air buzzed with a strange energy, fear, anger, curiosity. Today, the human would stand trial. Not for crime, but for heresy. Word had spread across the clans. The human healer had removed the warlord's scars, erased the sacred marks of the gods, and now their warriors were walking the world clean, stronger, faster, but without proof of their strength. The old ways were trembling, and the shamans wanted blood to steady them again. At the center of the courtyard stood a stone circle marked with ancient carvings. This was where warriors fought to defend their honor. But today there would be no battle of blades, only a duel of beliefs. Elias stood inside the circle, dressed in his dark coat, his small silver case resting beside him. His face was calm, though the sound of hundreds of growling Draxen echoed around him. Across from him stood High Shaman Vorin, draped in crimson robes made from the hides of ancient beasts. His body was a maze of scars from head to tail. Each mark was a story, each cut a prayer. To the Draxen, he was living history. Vorin pointed a claw toward Elias and shouted, "This creature dares to change the ways of the gods. He steals our marks, our memories, our proof of courage. Shall we allow it?" The crowd roared, "No!" Elias did not move. He waited for the noise to fade, then said quietly, "I don't steal your stories. I save your lives." Voron's eyes narrowed. "A life without scars is empty. Pain gives meaning. Suffering gives honor. You cannot understand that." Elias met his gaze. "Maybe you're right, but I understand loss. I've seen men die when they didn't have to. I've seen pain worshipped like a god until it destroyed everything." The words rippled through the crowd. They had never heard anyone speak against pain before, not like this. Korath, sitting on his throne at the edge of the arena, raised a claw. "Enough words," he said. "We will test the truth. Each will heal one of my warriors, one by faith, one by science. The living shall decide whose belief is stronger." The crowd gasped. A fair challenge, a sacred trial. 2 wounded soldiers were brought forward. Both had deep gashes from the same battle. One was given to Voron, one to Elias. The arena went silent. Voron began his chant immediately. His claws glowed faint red as he sprinkled black powder over the wound. The warrior screamed as the powder burned into his flesh. Voron's voice rose in power and fury, filling the courtyard with echoes of ancient prayer. Elias knelt by his patient. He opened his case, his tools glinting in the sun. He cleaned the wound with water, whispering softly to the soldier, "Stay still. You'll be fine." His voice was calm, almost gentle, a strange contrast to the shaman's wild ritual. He stitched the wound with precision, sealed it with a faint blue light from his device, and wiped the blood clean. Voron finished his chant with a roar. The warrior he treated was breathing hard, his wound still bleeding, the flesh scorched. "The pain is proof of strength," Voron shouted. Elias stepped back as his patient sat up slowly, confusion in his eyes. The wound on his chest was smooth, closed, no pain, no scar. The crowd gasped. The 2 soldiers stood side by side, one trembling and bleeding, one calm and steady, and the silence that followed was louder than any roar. Korath's voice broke the silence. "I see 2 healers. One brings pain, one brings peace. Which is stronger?" The crowd didn't know what to say. For the first time, their world had no answer. Voron's fury shook his body. "Peace is weakness," he shouted. "Without scars, we are nothing. He makes us soft." Elias looked around the arena. "If scars made you strong," he said quietly, "you would be gods already. But you still bleed. You still die. Maybe strength isn't what you show. It's what you overcome." Some of the younger warriors lowered their eyes, ashamed. They remembered the pain Elias had spared them, the sleep they could finally have without throbbing wounds. Voron turned to the warlord. "You cannot let this stand. His words poison our souls." Korath stood, his massive frame casting a shadow over them all. Perhaps our souls needed poison to see the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The warlord's support meant everything. Voron's voice broke, trembling with rage. "He will destroy us." Korath stepped forward, his eyes locked on Elias. "No, he will make us think." "And that frightens you." The shaman's claws clenched. In one swift motion, he lunged at Elias, a blade flashing from his sleeve. The crowd screamed, but Korath was faster. His massive hand caught Voron's wrist mid-air, snapping it with a sound that silenced the arena. "Enough," Korath growled. "The gods of scars are silent now. Let the human's way speak." The warlord turned to Elias, his voice low but firm. "From this day you will teach those who wish to learn. No one is forced, but no one is forbidden either." Elias bowed his head. "I will teach whoever seeks healing, not worship." Korath nodded. "Then perhaps Varkoth will live long enough to learn what true strength means." That night the fortress was quiet again, but it was a different silence. Not of fear, not of hate. It was the silence of a people thinking for the first time. Some Draxan still burned with anger, others with hope. But deep down they all knew something had changed forever. The duel had not been fought with weapons, but with truth. And truth, they realized, cut deeper than any blade. The duel was over, but its echoes lived on. For days, the fortress of Varkoth was filled with uneasy silence. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, and the chants of the shamans had fallen quiet. The old ways were shaking like a dying flame, and in the center of that quiet storm stood Dr. Elias Grant, the human surgeon, the scarless healer who had changed everything. He worked without guards, without protection. Yet no one dared touch him. Some avoided his gaze. Others followed him like shadows. He had become a legend, half savior, half heretic, Even warlord Korath was not the same. He no longer roared during feasts. He spent long hours staring at the smooth skin across his chest where his greatest scar had once been. He felt lighter, yes, but also uncertain, like a mountain that had lost its peak. Elias kept working. He didn't preach, didn't boast. Each day he healed, he taught. He showed the Draxan that pain was not the price of strength. It was the enemy of it. He trained young warriors in the art of care. They learned to clean wounds, to stitch, to think before charging into death. Their claws fumbled with his small tools at first, but slowly, they began to understand. Scars slow you down, Elias told them one morning, holding up a scalpel that gleamed under the torchlight. Healing lets you move again. Which do you think wins wars, the limp or the leap? The young Draxan nodded silently. They had seen the proof. Warriors healed by Elias fought stronger and faster. They didn't win because of their pain. They won because they were whole. But not everyone celebrated this new way. High Shaman Vorin had been exiled after the duel, but his followers still whispered in secret. They called Elias a false prophet, a creature who had stolen the favor of their gods. At night they spread fear. He takes your pain now, but one day he'll take your strength too. Some believed it. Some didn't. But everyone was watching. One evening, as the twin moons hung low and red, horns echoed from the northern cliffs. A rival clan, the Takar, had attacked. The Draxan fortress erupted into chaos. Warriors rushed to arms. The sky filled with fire and sound. Elias ran toward the medical tents, his coat whipping in the wind. Explosions shook the ground. The wounded poured in. Burns, missing limbs, shattered bones. The human moved faster than he ever had before. His hands were steady, his voice calm. "You're going to live," he told each soldier. "I promise." Korath fought on the front lines. His claws tore through the Takar invaders, his blade flashing with fury. But age and pride had left him slower than before. A plasma blast struck his chest, throwing him backward. The fortress trembled as the warlord fell. They carried Korath into the tent, blood pouring from the wound. The other warriors froze at the sight, their unbreakable leader gasping for breath. Elias pushed through the crowd. "Move!" He fell to his knees beside Korath. The wound was deep, the kind that killed quickly. Korath gripped his arm weakly. "You again?" "The man who defies death." "Not defies," Elias said. "Delays. Now let me work." He opened his kit, pulled out tools, and began. His hands moved faster than thought. Stitching, sealing, pressing, patching. The warriors watched in stunned silence as their leader's breathing steadied. Minutes passed like hours. Then stillness. Elias stepped back, his face pale, his voice hoarse. "He'll live." The warriors stared in disbelief. Their warlord, who should have died, still breathed. And once again, no scar. Only clean, healed skin. When Korath woke, it was to a fortress filled with cheers. The Takar had been driven off. The Draxan had won. But their victory songs were different now. There was no talk of glorious pain or sacred wounds. Only survival. Korath sat up slowly, looking at his unmarked chest. He felt no shame. Only strength. He called Elias to his side. "Human," he said, his deep voice calm but heavy with thought. "When I fought, I felt pain. When you healed me, I felt freedom. For the first time in my life, I do not wear my strength. I am it." Elias smiled faintly. "That's what I've been trying to show you. Strength isn't in scars, it's in what keeps you standing." The warlord nodded. "Then you have taught me more than my gods ever did." Days later, Korath gathered his council. The fortress hall was filled again, but this time the air carried no anger, only anticipation. The warlord stood, his voice echoing through the stone chamber. "From this day," he declared, "no warrior shall be judged by the scars they bear, but by the strength they keep. We are not slaves to pain. We are its masters." The crowd erupted, not with rage but with awe. Some dropped their weapons and touched their healed wounds in silence. Others looked toward Elias, who stood quietly at the back, his eyes downcast. Korath turned to him. "You have changed us, human. You gave us life when all we knew was death. You showed us that peace is not weakness, it is power waiting to be used." Elias said nothing. He only nodded once, humbled. That night the fires of Varkoth burned bright, not for war, but for rebirth. The warriors sang new songs, songs of renewal and unity. Children who once cut their skin to earn their first scar now played freely, laughing without fear of shame, and above it all, Standing alone under the twin moons, Elias looked out at the horizon. He had not come to change a species. He had only come to save lives. Yet now an entire civilization had been rewritten by the hands of a single, scarless human. He whispered to himself, "Maybe that's what healing really means."